Growing up in Shanghai during the Cultural Revolution, Professor Li navigated his way through that tumultuous period before coming to the US, where he received his master's from the University of California, Berkeley, and his doctorate from Princeton. Li is the author and editor of numerous books, including China's Leaders, The New Generation, and Chinese Politics in the Xi Jinping Era, and is currently professor and director on the Center of the Governance of China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. He spoke to us at the 2023 Investors Forum about China's economic priorities and US-China relations. Professor Li, Xi Jinping's economic priorities appear to have significantly changed over the past 10 years. The question is why?
Well, Xi Jinping himself will provide the explanation. In his word, the world has changed. We are in the period of unprecedented in a century. We just experienced the COVID-19, and Russia-Ukraine war is still ongoing. U.S.-China relations, the largest, two largest countries, the most important bilateral relationship has changed, and changed to a degree or deteriorated to a degree beyond anyone's imagination. So with all these changes, China's economic priorities and its policy agenda also need to change to adjust the ever-changed global geopolitical and economic landscape.
Okay, well, you talked about recent events. To what extent did a more aggressive US policies post-2016 influence Xi's approach towards the economy?
Well, first of all, under Trump administration, there's a trade war going on. But you also see the continuity from Trump to Biden, although there are some differences between two administrations, and I do not want to go into detail. But the continuation from Trump to Biden, two different individual leaders and two different parties, but you witness the continuity. This tells you probably less to do with individual leaders. In the same case with China, nothing to do, less to do with Chinese individual leaders, but to do with the structure change in the bilateral relationship, particularly from the US perspective. Now, when I talk about structure change, I refer to three things. Number one is United States has never experienced this kind of a challenge since World War II, if not earlier. During the Cold War, Russia or Soviet Union's challenge is largely military or in certain sectors of technology. But China's challenge is all comprehensive. So this is what the Chinese call the number one country and number two countries competition. Or some American scholars talk about Thucydides' trap, although I do not buy Thucydides' trap. But I do agree that the tensions between existing superpower and emerging superpower. This is number one. Number two, in terms of structure problem is also because if United States in good shape, they may not care about China's different ideology, political system, or economic model. I remember that when I was a student, came to the United States 38 years ago, China differed profoundly, far more different from today's the two countries. But now, because the US is in trouble, our vicious partisan politics, racial tensions, economic disparity, cultural war, all these make US especially sensitive about China's different political ideology, political system, and economic model. So at the same time, China emphasizes its own system superiority that also make US very angry, very nervous, or fear about China's ever-growing power. This is number two. Number three, China's middle class from not existed 30 years ago. You have the 30 years anniversary for your forum, but 30 years ago in 1993, there was no such a concept called China's middle class. And people just very cynical about the China's middle class. But now China's middle class become a reality, and China become the number one, the largest middle class country with 400 million people. But as China's middle class grow, although the COVID situation may slow down a little bit, but still continue to grow. And I met with Premier Li Qiang in March in the China Development Forum in Beijing. He said this is a small meeting. He said China's middle class will expand. He used the middle income group, similar to middle class, will increase from 400 million now to 500 million in the near future. And the Chinese ambassador Xie Feng, recently he wrote an article for Washington Post in which he also mentioned that according to Xi Jinping's agenda, by 2035, China's middle class will double, will become in the 800 million. So this all happened at a time that the American middle class is shrinking, and from like a 70% of the population after World War II to now about 50%. My colleague at the Brookings, I previously worked in Brookings for a couple of decades. My colleague wrote an article, and the finding is very striking. So basically, that the American male laborers, their income actually is lower than 50 years ago in 1970 on average. So you see this lower middle class is shrinking, the whole middle class is shrinking. So that causes tremendous tensions. That explains Donald Trump won the election 2016. That explained the Biden's foreign policy is foreign policy for middle class. So even he said he will abolish the tariffs, trade tariffs with China when he was president candidate, but he could not do that because American middle class or American working class oppose that the tariff lift, because they think that the trade with China only help cooperate America or Wall Street. So these all three things are the structural tensions cause some tremendous problem for U.S.-China relations.
Is there a technological schism between the West and China? And can China win and or maintain its current economic trajectory?
This is a very good question. In my view, China, certainly the science technology is a frontier, is the most divisive issue or the most important area for competition. So this is the dividing line. This is again, this is what Biden said. The precision, decoupling is largely reflect science and technology. But I would say that U.S.-China will remain, both countries remain as the major power in science technology for foreseeable future. Each side has the strengths and the weaknesses, and no country can completely surpass the other. There's also tremendous cooperation going on. Actually, that before 2019, AI cooperation between Chinese scientists and American scientists is like the 9.5% the collaboration into publication, etc., in the entire publication of AI. But the China's with Europe is only like a 3% or 4%. So talk about the cooperation. I was in Shanghai. There's called AI Island. You still see the American companies like I think Facebook and the other Amazon, and actually work very closely with the Chinese companies and in the same island about AI research. So certainly that the US wanted to decouple at the moment, and also some bans on certain crucial areas where semiconductor, AI, or quantum computing. But whether this really can benefit from US, I think this is not clear. There's a lot of discussion because China certainly has the strengths in terms of engineers training that they are like 3 times or even 6 times than US trained engineers every year. So again, China has already emerged as a global power in science technology. Before the ChatGPT, most people think that China probably already surpassed the United States in AI. But of course, that after ChatGPT, there's a lot of concern in China. Some Chinese scientists think that China lag far behind. But I think the competition could be good in the future, and also it's too early to say that which country is really have absolute superiority. So my point is that decouple in this area is highly problematic, and probably eventually will not work, but it will last for a while. And I will say to a certain extent that China science technology catch up benefits from the openness of our American system, and educational exchanges. I'm a beneficiary myself, and certainly benefit from the openness of our American universities and the science, technology, and also in my case, social sciences. But people like me who came to the United States in 1980s and 90s, and also beyond, that most of them, they received good education as an undergraduate in China, then came to US as an advanced degree in master or PhD, etc. This is also in my case. So I think we benefit from both countries. I think this is a great successful story, and in terms of science and technology exchange. This is the agreement signed by President Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping in 1979. But now, just recently, that the U.S. reviewed that one, and probably not want to renew that, as Congress argue. But the Biden administration eventually decided to choose somewhere in between, just renew for temporarily for 6 months or longer, then to see whether they can renew that agreement. But I think this, if we really end this agreement, certainly will hurt China, but probably also hurt the United States tremendously. So I think that we do need to see that the science and technology, the nature of the development needs the scholarly community, the academic cooperation, rather than one oppose another. So this is my view. I think that I hope the cooperation will continue and educational changes will continue. And remember, in the final year of the Trump administration, that some policymakers said that they want to completely end the educational exchanges. Eventually, President Trump vetoed it. But also there's an argument that they want to ban Chinese Communist Party members, their immediate family. How many? Because there was 94 million Chinese Communist Party members. It's also 200 million their immediate family, so almost like 300 million. Could you really ban these people? How do you know they're Communist Party members? So basically, it's a modern version, as some American colleagues criticize, modern version of 1884 Chinese Exclusion Act, a modern version of the race-based act. So this is against the American value, I would say against the American interest.
Do you think China needs to rethink its economic growth model, and if so, how?
Well, you raise the issue between security and development, or the equity versus growth. So Xi Jinping's priority first is on terms of security and development. He favors security. Now, this makes sense. We should ask, in today's world, which country has not put security above economic growth? United States, Russia, Japan, India. I mean, they all put security above the EU countries as well. So it's not just China is an exception. Actually, China is a part of this, the entire international community, especially major powers. Now, of course, there's some reason for that. Without security, whether for the government or I would say to the country, I mean, development is meaningless. You cannot survive. How could you, what's the point to have a development? But at the same time, when sometimes lack of development, lack of growth could be a threat to undermine the security. Of course, that this is because development could be a source. Lack of development could be a source of instability. That's also obvious. Now, so that tensions is dynamic. Chinese government need to make judgment. At this point, Xi Jinping certainly put that I said early on, because it's an unprecedented period in a century. China faces a lot of challenges, particularly U.S. want to put China down and etc. So it makes sense you want to have security or stability first. But the question is, Chinese government need to judge. At the moment, there's a lack of confidence among the business community, whether Chinese own private sector or foreign investors. Very few foreigners want to visit China, and even visited Hong Kong, etc. So that's not good for China, and China should address that issue. Now, also in terms of economic development, Xi Jinping also shifted from single-minded growth to what he called common prosperity on the one hand, and energy sustainability on the other hand. So common prosperity is basically just want to enhance the middle income group or middle class. Early on, he called it the Chinese dreams. So in a way, I think this is good policy because some critics, both in China and outside China, think it's anti-market, anti-growth. I disagree. I think the common prosperity or enhance the middle class could stimulate three engines of growth, namely consumption, investment, and foreign trade, if they handle in a right way. Of course, in the past few years, you see all these three areas, and each of them have some problem. But this is not may not be completely to do with the Chinese government policy or strategic shift, but also the trade war against China, decoupling, relocation, global economic slowdown, China's structure change, and the worry about the Taiwan Strait crisis, etc., all play important roles. So it's not just the policy per se. Now, but overall, I think if China will continue that trajectory as we earlier on mentioned about the middle class expansion from 400 million to 800 million, this will stimulate the Chinese economy, will stimulate the growth, will give tremendous opportunity as the largest global market. So this is one thing. I think it's the right objective, maybe execution should be improved. The other is the energy sustainability. To a certain extent, it's deliberate effort to not have a too high growth rate. Some Chinese scientists think that if China want to commit it to carbon neutrality, and China's growth should not go beyond 4.2%. So now it's about 5% or 5.5%. This already could have a negative impact for the green development. So this is undeliberate. So part of that, China has become a leader in terms of clean energy, whether solar power, wind, or battery, right? So that's actually the welcome development. Even some critics acknowledge the green development under Xi Jinping. Now, when Xi Jinping, early on come to power, the world 20 most polluted cities, 16 were located in China. But a few years ago, in Xi Jinping's, towards the end of his second term, the top 20 most polluted cities, only 2 were located in China, 15 located in India. So that reflects within that 10 year, less than 10 years, that China's green development, really developed in such a very healthy and fast speed. So that's a welcome development. That also contributed to what I said early on, the priority change.
You touched on consumption earlier, and a lot of Western commentators think China should encourage more consumption. But how do you think Xi views consumption in services versus production and industries?
Well, certainly that the consumption is important. I will say lack of confidence about the Chinese consumers and the Chinese small business and the Chinese entrepreneurs is a serious problem the Chinese leader need to address carefully. But on the other hand, I think China is the most, I don't know how to put it, Chinese people are probably most entrepreneurial orientated. To use the language, probably some people think may not be appropriate. It's, based on my observation, no people like Chinese so eager to get money. This is what I call entrepreneurship. I remember that I visited Guangzhou and also just twice. Like the midnight is some of the market just start. I also met a Chinese scholar, distinguished scholar, just in my trip to Beijing. He told me that he was in southern Xinjiang, in Hashi. They found that at 2 o'clock in the early morning, there's so many activities still going on. You probably heard that just a few months ago, there's one city called Zibo in Shandong. This is the third tier city. All of a sudden, become like the capital of a barbecue. There's some people took a train to go to these places. Now, these are anecdotal things reflect Chinese entrepreneurship, Chinese consumption. And also the statistics about the domestic travel already returned to normalcy. But you're right, there's some still lag behind. People think that previously, before 2019, it's much even more dynamic. So there's there's maybe a gap between just you open up and then promote consumption, or something maybe that's still missing in the reporting, in the data, but in reality it's already happening. But it's fair to say that international travel, to China is a serious problem. You do not see so many foreigners. I think that China should be more open to welcome foreign tourists, not only just Chinese American or Canadian Chinese and etc., but should be open to everyone, and also foreign students from Western countries and etc. These areas should be promoted. Now, China will host the International Import Expo. This is probably the 5th or 6th time, and Xi Jinping will attend in November in Shanghai. I hope all these kind of activities and will change the current situation. There's a lack of confidence in China's market by both Chinese and foreigners, and also promote Chinese people to spend, to invest. And there's a joke spirit in China. They think the Chinese leaders thought that people have money, and Chinese people thought the government had policy, but they end up neither. But I would say both are actually still there. I think Chinese government still have a lot of policies, options, and Chinese people do have the high savings, but they should spend, they should invest. But the fact that they have high savings actually could be good things, because American middle class do not have savings. That's a serious problem. So again, I think that these require Chinese government have more open policy to stimulate the market, and sometimes the central government should make a major move and to provide the confidence for private sector, for foreign investors, that more people invest, more people consume, and more people borrow money rather than just very conservative. This, if that happen, and I'm quite optimistic. I think that Hong Kong, now our conference is holding here, should be the pioneer to change the current situation. I think Hong Kong is ready, because remember that 6 or 7 years ago, Beijing believed that Shenzhen or Shanghai can replace Hong Kong, become a financial center, but now very few people talk about that. So Hong Kong is still Asia's leading financial center, and Hong Kong is the most cosmopolitan city in the world. And Hong Kong, despite all these unfortunate things happened in the past few years, and at least that there's still some important debate whether one country, one system, or one country, two systems. In my view, I think the Chinese, the best interest for Chinese government, for Beijing, to leave it open, give it more autonomy. This is actually at least the central government's commitment. So with all these things, with the more policy, I think it's on the way that reduce significantly about the stamp duty, and also to reduce the hurdle, right? And let more people in mainland can invest, and also that there's money from the Middle East, from Saudi, may move from investment in the U.S. to Hong Kong. I think this is already happening because they're concerned, they worry about the American political situation after 2024, and also the American sanction against Russia also sends some warning for some other investors. So this is all unfold in Hong Kong's favor. Now, I'm certainly mindful that the Hong Kong's IPO certainly declined, whether in terms of money, in terms of things. This is quite strange for me. That certainly shows lack of confidence. But I think there's a more consensus start to emerge. That situation should be changed. I hope that I think Chinese central government and also Hong Kong government will work together to change the current status. And besides, the stock market is so low, this is a great opportunity to invest, right? So I'm optimistic. My optimism is not based on what I said, but also reflect what I did. I moved from Washington, where I spent 17 years in the think tank called Brookings, now to Hong Kong U to help establish a new center to study China, to study United States, to study bilateral relationship. I hope that the center will use the research, use the data to really present a strong case to challenge the structural tensions between China and United States with scholarship, serious academic research to reflect, despite all the differences between China and United States, we share some important common interests. I mean, neither country wanted a real complete collapse of international financial system. Neither country wants to have a war. So let's work together.
We're looking into the future, Professor. So over the next 10 years, do you think China will become more European, more Japanese, more American, or will it become its own special, type?
Well, it's its own special type. This is what the Chinese leaders call modernization with Chinese style, or Chinese style modernization. This actually changed from previously socialism with Chinese characteristics. So now they wanted to emphasize modernization. Now, let me put it in the perspective. Over the, from Deng Xiaoping's reform until maybe before Xi Jinping came to power, the general mood is to learn from the West. So Deng Xiaoping's reform, that the reform period is largely to study, to learn from the West, including Japan and Europe and the United States. But that period came to an end, partly because these countries, from Chinese perspective, rightly and wrongly, had some problems, political and economic disparity. I don't want to go into detail. And partly because China now have more confidence about itself, because China is already emerged as the second largest economy in the world, the largest middle class country, and this is beyond anyone's prediction. China's the transportation system, the fastest train, it's already become really the best in the world, and also talk about the middle class development. Now, this does not mean that China will completely reject anything from the West. They still wanted to learn some of the things is good. This is what they call modernization with Chinese style, or Chinese style modernization. China wants to be part of the world with the advanced country, including United States, Japan, and EU. But at the same time, that China wanted to pursue, particularly on the political system, and also use common prosperity to avoid the economic disparity. According to Xi Jinping, that the economic disparity caused many countries in a chaotic situation, including China's Hong Kong during the past few years. So this is the things that China will avoid. But at the same time, Xi Jinping also mentioned frequently, we emphasize people-to-people exchanges. This implies that China can learn the other, culture. It should be culture integration, not a culture isolation or culture convergence. These are the things China will reject. But again, exchanges, dialogue, and on the equal footing rather than one teacher, one student. So that period is over.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Professor. Valuable comments. Thank you.
Thank you.